Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto prevented the Fourth Shinobi War. It was their last, desperate gambit. Their last hope. They pinned everything on a prayer that he could save them, and now, he's not even sure if he can make it count anymore. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 13. The bottle was near empty. It's been sitting on that table for well over a decade. Hardly touched or even glanced at. The last time he could remember opening it was the night the Third War had been declared and all forces were marching on Konoha. Since then, he probably hadn't touched the damn thing. 1 week after the arrival of Hai no Kuni's daimyo, and it was nearing empty. Magajiro Kuta was the very last person he expected to arrive here. Even the monkey Hiruzen would have been less of a surprise. The villages, lesser and greater, held a balance of power between the daimyo and the kage. In Iwa, he technically held more power than the daimyo Michizu. Iwa's rough mountain terrain did not make for good farmland or massive populations of people. So, his ninja, despite still being outnumbered by the daimyo's men, could, according to calculations and scenarios, deal with the daimyo's armies with strength to spare. Suna was the same, and now it seemed the daimyo of the deserts was taking steps to remedy that by hiring out other villages as opposed to his own, hoping to weaken the Yondaime Kazekage's power base enough for them to be on equal footing. He had his eyes on that to see how it would play out, and he had no doubt Michiza did as well. The Kiri ninja, however, were particularly reliant on their daimyo. The man controlled the navy, which meant he controlled all import, export, border control and communications within the islands. Kumo and Konoha were the only villages that were truly standing on even ground with their respective daimyo. For that reason, more than anything else, the daimyo of these two nations were very well guarded and cared for. Should the daimyo die and his heir find that the ninja in their employ did not do absolutely everything within their significant power to avoid such, it could destabilize the political and social arena of both nations. Sarutobi coming here, while surprising, would have made some sense. He could observe the Chunin exams and make sure nothing happened to the genin involved. Moreover, the man could protect himself from any shinobi in the village, even him. Kuta could not. Neither could his samurai. If Inoki truly wanted them dead, he could have it done in an eye blink. Orochimaru was powerful, but he was not an omnipotent force able to survive every ninja in an entire village bearing down on him. He knew this. But worse than that, his men knew this. Now, not only did he have to keep his eye on the man, he also had to keep himself and keep his own shinobi calm. They knew their orders, but this was a lit torch in a powder keg. One stray ember was all that would be needed to make the whole thing go to hell. One drunken brawl, one stray suggestion from one idiot to another could spark the Fourth War. Or worse. A deliberate measure. Iwa and Kumo were united only in so much as the fact that they hated Konoha more than each other. With Kumo's rapid military expansion and the fact that they were reported to hold a very powerful Jinchuriki, they might just be looking to flex some of their muscle. What better way to do it than have this thing blow up under Iwa's nose, have them take the brunt of the blame and the stigma that the neutrality of the Chunin exam, established nearly a decade ago, was first broken by them. Even by shinobi standards, the deception would stick enough to hurt them. Clients didn't trust in people who were known for violating agreements. With the lack of adequate guards the man himself had brought, the situation was only exacerbated. He had to order his ninja, many, if not all of whom had lost family and friends during the Third War, to both Hai no Kuni's ninja and samurai, that not only did they have to leave them alone, but that they had to actively try to protect them. Needless to say, it was not sitting well, if at all. Konoha had dropped a bomb on his front door, all to nominate that little Namake's spawn. Yes, Namake's. Uzumaki my ass. He snorted. That was Namake's Minato's son, or he was the daimyo's wife. His lips curled. He would never forget the face of the man that had slaughtered well over 300 men in a single night. It was a face he dreamed of slicing to ribbons. He'd celebrated for a month after he heard of his death. Everyone in the village did. That damn monkey, he wanted to make a statement, show the whole world that they lost once to Minato, and they'll lose just as easily to his infant son. That Minato Namikaze would soon come a second time onto the world, and he would still be a Konoha ninja. He took another drink. Evidently the god of Shinobi forgot that accidents happened all the time at these exams. The Namikaze brat might just find that out the hard way. When your team number is called, please walk up here. One of the Chunin examiners spoke. From here you will follow one of our proctors to your examination area. Clearing his throat as he began to call up the names on his clipboard, Naruto turned to his teammates. What do you guys think is gonna happen? He scrunched up his nose in feigned ignorance. I heard they gave written tests before anything. Sometimes. Kyofu shook her head. But not all the time. I guess with so many teams here they believe a written test will be a waste of time since they don't have the proctors to look out for cheating, or the time to grade the exams quickly enough. My guess is they're heading straight for the phase that cuts down the teams down to half the number at least. Naruto nodded. It made sense. There were a lot of teams here. He'd spotted nearly 10 from IWA and 7 from Kumo. Beside Haku and that bone guy, he'd also spotted at least 2 more from Kiri, at least 1 from Suna, and another half dozen from the minor villages. And those were the only ones he was, or could keep some semblance of track of. All in all there were at least 100 genin here, maybe more. He couldn't blame them for wanting to cut down teams. What do you think the test is gonna be about though? Ryoko asked, crossing her arms. I've heard it can be anything from survival to capture flag missions, defend the target or combat. It can be. The mocha-skinned girl answered. I think they just make it up a week before the exam, or just recycle old ideas. No way to really guess till they tell you. Well, that sucks. The silver-haired preteen muttered. Think they'll rig it to get us kicked quick? It's a distinct possibility. That's one reason why Konoha never nominates teams for the exams here, and IWA never nominates teams for the exam there. The mistrust is too deep. No matter what the treaties say. Hey, it doesn't matter. Naruto grinned. We'll beat whatever they throw at us. Ryoko smirked. Kyofu ruffled his hair, to his slight irritation. It was minutes later that the Chunin's voice finally called them. Teammate of Konohagakure no Sato under Orochimaru, no surname offered. Please step up. A slight hush fell over the crowd, the bulk of which were still IWA genin. And, even though the teams had all been called in a similar fashion, they couldn't help but feel the target being painted on their backs as they marched up to the front of the room. The Chunin tossed them a carefully neutral look. Please follow one of our proctors, he said, and the children found another Chunin stepping forward to lead them out the back door. It wasn't long after that they were transported, via Shunshin, onto the peaks of a mountain. Now, IWA had many mountains, but he highly doubted that many of them could have them looking down at bloody clouds. Holy hell! You will begin your exam here, the proctor stated crisply before pulling out a folder from under his arm and handed it to Kyofu. These are your targets. The purple-haired girl opened the folder curiously, her 2 teammates crowding around her with Naruto standing on his toes to get a proper look. It was a Kusagakure genin team. Each team, the proctor continued, will carry one of these. A coin was produced from his vest, one with the number 42 on its face with the other holding the leaf symbol. The coin will have a number and the respective village symbol. Each coin is unique. You must arrive with both your own coin and that of your targets to pass this portion of the exam. So, this is a mock package mission combined with search and destroy? Kyofu asked. The proctor nodded. Also, survival. Your half-day's climb from the village. You're expected to find your way down the mountain and return by the fourth day, time to track your targets and return if you're capable. Be aware though, your targets are tracking another team and another team is tracking you. If your targets find their targets first and get back to the village then there's no way to pass. Naruto muttered, to the Chunin's nod. Ryuko whistled lowly looking towards Kyofu. You weren't kidding when you said they were gonna try and cut us at least by half. We fail by losing our coin, letting them get away, getting beat by another team, or just letting the time run out. The eldest took a deep breath. Indeed. Looks like we'll have our work cut out for us. The Chunin nodded, looking bored. Since this test also includes survival, hand over your kunai, shuriken pouches, and ninja tools. I'll return them to your sensei and you can get them from him upon arrival, or upon your recovery should teams be necessary to come retrieve you after the fourth day. The three unstrapped their equipment pouches where they could, emptied their pockets when that wasn't an option. The Chunin nodded, and then without another word, vanished via Shunshin. The spoon was clinking softly within the cup as he stirred his tea. Pale hands gripped the ceramic glass, bringing it close to his lips to sip with a hum of satisfaction. Closing his eyes, he thought this is very good tea. It was almost easy to imagine himself sitting in Konoha enjoying this tea across from the daimyo rather than here. As such, the act of completely and utterly disregarding the existence of the 15 glowering Iwagakure jounin that stood across the hall with looks that promised murder, passed from being easy to very nearly being inconsequential. Indeed, were it not for the irritating fly that was their collective killing intent, he honestly might have forgotten they were there at all. The other jounin from other villages were giving him a rather wide berth to say the least, even the Sunanin. No one wanted to be at the center of this mess should it blow up. While he liked the quiet, he could vaguely remember some of the old stories from other jounin sensei about how they were able to easily make some acquaintances in the easy atmosphere of a chunin exam, and found himself rather irritated at the fact that his chances of enjoying such a novelty were cut down so drastically. He may not have indulged, but to have the option expunged before he could choose whether or not to act on it was just irritating. He was about to take another sip when, evidently one of the jounin decided to gather up whatever dregs of courage he could call his own and spoke up. You shouldn't be here, Tree Huger. The Sannin blinked, panning his eyes left and right. Oh? He chuckled. I was under the impression that this was the jounin waiting area. Did I perhaps get the wrong room number? Before the young man could answer he shrugged. Oh well. I've grown to like it here. I think I'll stay. The man marched over. He was younger than the Sannin if he were to be any judge. He couldn't have been any more than a chunin for the war. Perhaps recently promoted, believing himself strong, especially with all his friends behind him. Experienced ninja didn't bluster so. Though maybe that was a common stupidity in all ranks of Iwagakure. The man's hand slapped the teacup out of his, and sent it smashing into the floor. Look snack dash. His now free hand lashed out, blindingly fast. The man could only catch sight of it when it had already found its target. Pale fingers were wrapped around his wrist in a grip that was as strong as a vice, nearly crushing the delicate bones outright. The jounin moved to retaliate before he froze, a kunai knife just half a millimeter from his eye, as Orochi pulled him forward, turning him onto his back as he lay across the table. Then, the hand that had gripped his wrist was at his throat, holding him in place. The knife was never wavered from its place just before the membrane of his eyeball. The serpent was suddenly surrounded by as many jounin as he could be, knives and swords poised to strike several vital areas. He kept his gaze on the younger man. Now look at what you've done. He chided with a tooting sound. You've gone and made everyone tense. Can't you see they're concerned for their students? Let him go, Snake. One of the kunoichi hissed. And you've also spilled my tea. He groused. It was very good. I'd offer some, but you went and wasted it. That was just rude. He grinned. What would your mother say if she saw such manners? A sword dug into his back. I said let him go. In the next second, Furumbu were in the room. What is the meaning of this? One of them hissed. Nothing. The serpent laughed, picking up the boy and tossing him towards one of the masked men, who hastily caught him as he stumbled. Merely giving a lesson in table etiquette. The Umbu and the Jounin looked as though they were ready to push this when someone, a Kirinin, stepped forward. His teeth were filed to a point beneath his lips, and a massive sword was slung over his back. He stood a full head taller than most in the room. Your boy there decided to get uppity. He threw the first punch here. None of the IWA Jounin appreciated his interference. They'd been looking for any excuse. The Umbu nodded after a moment. Should this happen again, all involved will be confined to cells for the duration of the exam. This is your only warning. The Umbu waited for the Jounin to return to their own corners before they eventually vanished. Orochimaru sat back down on the table. The Kirinin chose to sit across from him. You're either brave or stupid for coming here, Leaf. He muttered. The Sannin smirked. Perhaps. But more's the fool who paints a target on his back where once he had none. The man shrugged, shifting the blade on his shoulder. Not like they'll do anything to me when you're the real slice of meat they want. The Sannin snorted a laugh. True enough. He eyed the man up and down. I assume you've got your own students here. Heh. Heh. The best Kiri has to offer. They're strong enough to only be a two-man cell. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow, lacing his hands in front of his mouth as he leaned forward. Really, rumor has it Kiris suffered some recent unrest. Could it perhaps be less a case of their strength and your village's lack of it? He chuckled as the man said nothing. Need to put on a show to give some reassurances, yes? At length, the swordsman snorted. If we were to go on believing rumors, Konoha's on its last legs with your Hokage dead, that kitsune biting off your faces, and those clans of yours having no bloodlines in forever. HN. Good thing we don't strive on rumors then. He chuckled. I do believe I recognize you from my bingo books. I recognize you. Orochimaru of Konohagakure. The so-called death dealer. You held the lines against IWA with that teammate of yours before that Yondaime cut Iwa's balls and dick off. He grinned. You're just lucky your daimyo's navy was able to hold off the bulk of our forces at sea otherwise. The Sannin smiled, paying no never mind to the implied threat. An apt description of Minato's effects on IWA. He laughed quietly at how some of the other IWA ninjas seated where they stood. I pray you'll forgive my short memory though. The man seemed to take no offense as he grinned, blue lips peeling back to show off those pointed teeth. Hashige Kisame. The monster of Kiri. I never liked shogi. Kota muttered. You're good at it, Magajiro-sama. It's too stale. He continued. Too even as well. On the battlefield you are outnumbered, or you outnumber the enemy. No two armies have the exact numbers. No two encounters will be the same. Yes, Magajiro-sama. True innovation lies in the man that can defeat an army that is greater than his. True soldiers can turn the tide with a single act of courage. That never happens here. Yes, Magajiro-sama. The daimyo raised up his eyes in something akin to a glare. You've let me win 7 games. I order you to beat me at this next one. My lord, I have tried, but you are making stupid moves that would let you win in a dozen different ways. Now you will beat me at this next game. That is my order. You wouldn't wish to displease me, would you? The samurai looked like he was trying to decide whether or not he could have the earth swallow him whole at the moment. Kota leaned back in his chair. The garden they sat in was large, and the dense foliage nearly hid the rear garden walls from view. Possibly all the better for ninja to sneak in or out should it be necessary. Then he flipped the board around, his pieces now with the servant and the servants now with him. Make the first move. he demanded, taking a sip of his tea. The man swallowed thickly, then he picked up his piece and moved it to a tile. He played the game and once more made deliberately stupid moves, his gaze boring into the man. On trembling fingers, the samurai picked up a piece and set it on the table. "Check, mate me lord." The daimyo smirked, leaning forward. "Now, that wasn't so bad. Was it?" The man shook his head in a stiff set of jerks. They set up the board again, and he gave the same order. Now they played a real game. The man hesitated often, but with every game his confidence grew as the daimyo praised him whenever he took a piece on the board. They were getting into their fourth real game, beginning to hit something of a stride when it happened. 3 shuriken raced out of the garden trees. The samurai who was currently winning their game dove forward with a startled shout of "Me lord!" pushing him to the ground and receiving one of the pointed stars lodged in his leg for his efforts. The samurai that were flanking the nearby doorway rushed forward, bellowing out the cry of an intruder, and already he could hear the angry shouts and the clanking footsteps of a dozen other armored men charging down the halls towards them. Kuta pushed himself up, and the armored man off of him, rolling in his robes, top knot disheveled. He managed to catch a shadow in the trees now. His guards whipped out chains with weights at the end. Shinobi were notoriously fast. The samurai had learned quickly that the best way to catch them was with chains at the weighted end to coil around limbs, or even just trip up strides. This one tried to jump, dodging the swings as it landed on another tree looking to escape. Then it lost its footing and fell. Kuta raised an eyebrow. Ninja never lost their footing on bloody trees. Seconds later his men were pouncing on it, and Kuta dusted off his overturned seat, sat himself back down, reached for the still warm tea on the other table and waited. He looked to the man that had saved him, gripping at his bleeding leg where the star still stuck out of his calf, dripping onto the floor. "We'll get that tended to," he promised. The man hissed but nodded. It was a moment later his men dragged forward the assassin. Though perhaps miscreant would be the more apt term. "How old are you, girl?" he asked. Gold eyes glared beneath dark lashes. She didn't answer as she hissed and bared her teeth. Kuta stared at her with a grave neutrality. "Do you know that attacking the daimyo of any country is a crime punishable by summary execution?" One of his men drew a sword, brandishing the gleaming blade, and the girl seemed to lose some of her bluster. Kuta's stare stayed on her for a time before he jerked his head to another of his men. "See that my game partner is tended to. And call Ryatenbin. He should be made aware of his lack of hospitality." He took a sip of his tea. "Disarm her." Weapons and pockets were stripped bare, ankles and hair checked, fingers pried her lips and teeth open even as she tried to bite down. They didn't disrobe the girl because he stopped them before they could go that far. "Let go of one of her arms." They did so, every man staying close and ready. To everyone's immense surprise, the man turned in his seat, reached around for the board and table, and then planted it between himself and the kneeling girl. "Pick up the pieces, set up the board," he ordered, and 2 of his men moved to do so. He took another sip of his tea. "I never liked the game much." "Do you play often?" he asked with simple ease as his servants began to set up the board. The mountain rocks were sharp. If they didn't know how to stick to things with chakra, keeping their hands and feet from sliding precariously on these ledges, their hands and feet would have long since been sliced open. The terrain was rough, and the air was thin. They were tiring a bit faster than they were accustomed. But that held true for all teams. They'd had to wait till almost sunset to determine where to go. The last thing they wanted was to climb down, only to realize they'd been climbing down the opposite side. Kyofo had suggested waiting until nightfall to see if they could tell where the village was by the glow of civilization lights. And they could, luckily. They'd all gotten some sleep earlier and were now trekking through the mountain with nothing more than moonlight to guide them, following the glow of the village before they eventually broke the cloud cover. They were also noticing a great many campfires from their perch from on high. The teams must have come down earlier. Kyofu assessed. They've gotten quite a head start. We'll catch up now. Naruto asserted. Ryoko agreed. They sleep, we move. We'll probably catch a few off guard if we hurry. Ultimately, every team was heading towards the village. So, step 1, head towards the damn village. Step 2, find their target on the way somehow, and on step 3, beat the crap out of their hunters if they manage to track them somehow. Simple and really their only option. They couldn't exactly comb across the whole mountain in 4 days. It was late, more likely than not approaching dawn by the time they decided to make camp. Ryoko hunted their meal, a mountain goat. Naruto volunteered to take the first watch. Without any ninja tools on them, they couldn't lay down a perimeter with traps. They were left with the simple tired, tested and true shifts system. Once his teammates were settled in for what was left of the night, the blonde quietly formed a seal. Kagebunshin no jutsu, he whispered. 10 clones were arrayed before him, kneeling down as they huddled close. Go on and try to find M. He whispered. Split up. The clones nodded and each took off down the slopes with additional grins. It had been a while. Anoki all but knocked the door off its railings when he slammed it open. His eyes were wide and worried, contrasting sharply with the thunderous expression his face bore. Ryatenbin. Kota greeted, still sipping at his tea. The pieces hadn't been moved at all since he'd moved his piece. Don't be so loud. The girl is trying to think of an opening move. He said. Grandfa, Sachikage-sama. She whimpered, wincing as one of the samurai held her down more firmly as she squirmed. Anoki took one look at the girl, and at the men holding her before he brusquely demanded let go of her. Now. The men hesitated, looking to their lord in askance. Our host has made a demand. Koto intoned, drinking his tea. Respect it. They let go. The girl rubbed at her shoulder, but seemed otherwise unharmed. She turned towards her grandfather and opened her mouth to speak before he held up a hand. We will have words about this later. He said, and with a wave of his hand an umbu was at the girl's side, shimmering into existence before they were both gone in a wisp of smoke, leaving the sandame with the daimyo. The younger man blew at his tea, cooling it before he spoke. You've been standing around for well over an hour. He said towards his men. Go, get some rest. You've earned it. The men hesitated, but slowly began to file out of the gardens, leaving their lord alone with the enemy commander in dusk's twilight. Do you play often? He inquired. Anoki bowed stiffly, working his jaw as he tried to pull the words free of his throat. On behalf of Iwagakure I must offer my most sincere dash. Ryatenbin. The man interrupted firmly, keeping his eyes on the board as he spread his hands out in a welcoming gesture. Play a game with me. You're not responsible for children acting foolish. The small man's jaw was tense. And anyone with the mind to look could have seen his teeth grinding together before he bowed stiffly and marched forward, taking a seat across from him. He set his piece down on the tile with a sharp crack. Kota took in a breath, taking up his own piece and settling it down with a much gentler touch, the tile leaving only a small clicking sound. I didn't realize she was your granddaughter. Crack, do not feign. He stopped himself before uttering the careless insult. You didn't kill her. Click, I didn't come here to kill children. He answered drolly. I will see that my men secure your residence better. I will reprimand them accordingly for their carelessness, and it was carelessness, I assure you. Crack. I would hope so. He answered. If you've resorted to sending your non-graduated granddaughter as an actual attempt on my life, I'd worry for the girl's sake. The older man looked at the board, then he stood up off of his seat. I'm sorry, but I must be going, your security must be seen to immediately. Kota kept staring at the board, speaking just before Anoki crossed the threshold to leave. He kept moving the pieces. She was brave, Ryatenbin. Praise her for it. Crack. Also. Click. I've done you a kindness. One day I will expect one in return. Crack. Is that all? Anoki asked. Click. One more thing. Crack. Don't throw your games. The Kage turned, looking over his shoulder where he could see his queen before the king in a perfect checkmate. He turned and left. Kota stood after a moment, groaning as his back cracked after so many hours. Never liked this game anyway, he muttered before heading inside himself. Naruto woke by the time midday was already approaching, blinking curiously as the memories of his clone assaulted him, bringing him to full wakefulness with a pounding headache. It was one of the reasons he was so hesitant on using his once signature jutsu. Brain damage wasn't exactly something he could just bounce back from without Kurama's help. If he overloaded himself here, he could very easily die. He had sent out 10 clones and had one dispel every hour on the hour to avoid an overload of information. As it was, this was his 7th clone and the headache was getting to the point of needing an aspirin. The next 2 would probably be migraine-inducing. He began to sort through the memories. Random strands of thoughts and emotions flitted through his mind's eye as he recalled the clone's night search. His eyes snapped open. Lucky number 7. He muttered. Was it? Ryoko muttered, eyes still closed as she sat by the fire trying to pull herself free of the last vestiges of sleep. Her hair was a mess. Clearly, she was not a morning person. Naruto pulled the smile off his lips. Oh, nothing. So, I'm thinking we should head He paused, looking down the slope a bit. That way. He pointed. Why? Ryofu asked, blinking in genuine curiosity. I got a good feeling. Naruto replied simply. It was with some coaxing, insistent whining, that Naruto managed to convince his teammates to go with his suggestion. Tracking the genin after they reached the spot where Naruto's clone had been dispelled was a bit trickier. Naruto was never a tracker. But with some nature chakra, he was able to sense all the teams around them and decided to make a beeline to the closest one in the direction that they'd been heading when his clone had seen them. They ran into 3 other teams and were losing daylight by the time they finally came across their targets making camp. These assholes have kunai. Ryoko hissed. SHH. Survival test my ass. That Proctor sabotaged us. Kyofu grabbed the girl by the shoulder, pulling her down and looking at both her and Naruto. Yes, irritating. We get that. Now we need a plan. She muttered, eyes growing pensive as she dared another look around the boulder. Okay, they're obviously setting up camp now, they'll be setting up their trap soon. Hit them before they do? Naruto ventured, leaning up and over. Tactics were never his strongest suit. Sakura used to come up with them. He would drop into the place and start cracking heads. Discovering an enemy's weakness mid-fight he could do. Using the terrain, predicting movements, reactions well in advance, not so much. No. She muttered. Right now, we don't know anything about their physical abilities, so. She dared another glance. The genin were beginning to dig the pit for the fire while 2 others kept a lookout. She narrowed her eyes. Idea. You know. Madoka cursed as his kunai was used as a makeshift spade, digging into the ground to carve out a rough ditch. I ain't doing this again. It was your turn this time, Tomo. Quit whining. Another, Tomo perhaps, replied. I get to keep watch and rub those 2 goddamn sticks for the fire for a whole hour before it actually takes. You really want to do that? Stop complaining, both of you. We haven't found our targets yet, and we have no idea who could be looking for us. So stop acting like this is a backyard camp. Tomo snorted, Madoka grumbled. Finally, the pit was dug and the 2 traded places while the third went to begin setting up the traps around the camp. Tomo rubbed furiously as hands rolled one stick between them as its tip dug into the kindling to try and light it. Smoke rose in a gentle gossamer thin string. The Kusa Genin leaned in close to try and blow the embers into flames. His hands worked and worked, calloused grips growing sore with the dry tinder's stubborn refusal to hold a light. "Come on," he growled, leaning in to blow once more. Then the fire exploded in his face, and the wind batted the embers into his eyes. "Arg!" He screamed bloody murder, clawing at his eyes as the burning tinder blinded him. "Tomo! What happened?" Both Genin screamed, rushing towards their crying teammate. With one's back exposed, Ryoko exploded from the shadows of the rocks, a stick in her hand, a crude wind blade glowing across its surface. The two Genin turned their attention to her, allowing Naruto to leap out of the shadows. "Dynamic entry!" he cried just before his 6-year-old frame was latched around one Genin's head, coiling his legs around his neck while his hands beat furiously on his head with the blunt end of kunai he pilfered off from where they were slipped on the boy's shoulder holster. Many adults would call the fact that he was laughing at this violence rather disturbing. The last standing Genin floundered, not knowing where to turn his attention before Ryoko was on top of him. He brought his kunai to bear, only for the wind blade to slice them cleanly, leaving the confused boy with nothing but the hilts before that same stick, with the chakra-enhanced blade, now absent, breaking over his head. The girl grabbed him by the hair, bringing his face down on her knee as he reeled. Then she punched him once, grabbing him by the collar before he could fall, and punched him 2 more times for good measure before she ripped his shuriken pouch off his leg and let him hit the ground. "Take my goddamn weapons from me," she muttered, cursing under her breath as though the Genin was the guilty party here. Naruto was still giggling. "Say uncle," he demanded, choking the red-eyed young man and hitting him over the head with the kunai when he tried to raise his arms to strike him. Keyword being tried. Naruto moved to dodge the blows easily and absorb them where he couldn't. "Come on. Say it." "He can't say anything, Naruto," Kyofu chided as she stepped out from wherever she'd been hiding. "One needs air for that." The Genin fell to his knees and Naruto finally relented in his grip, springing off his target, leaving the Konoha team standing amongst 3 pitifully groaning enemies. Kyofu marched up to the one best suited to speak at the moment. Seeing as how one was crying with burnt eyes and the other was most likely sporting a concussion or skull fractures. "Where's your token?" she asked. The Genin gulped, coughing as he tried to force air through his abused throat. "Totomo has it." The purple-haired girl looked to the one with the burnt-out eyes. "I'll get it," Naruto offered, marching forward and looking through the pockets. "Don't worry, buddy," he consoled. "The stinging stops after a bit, and there shouldn't be scarring once a Mednin sees ya." He hoped that last part was true anyway. He patted through the multiple pouches and pockets in the teen's camo jacket. A movement caught Kyofu's eye and she turned in time to see the Genin Naruto had been choking reach into his own pocket and toss the token down the side of the mountain. "No!" Ryoko roared. Kyofu's fingers snapped out, and a thin blue chakra string latched onto the thing before yanking it back to her hand. She winked down at the writhing Genin. "Nice try. Where the hell'd you learn that?" her silver-haired teammate questioned. "Sensei didn't teach us that." Kyofu giggled. "Did you forget I had a team and sensei before joining yours? Come on. Maybe if we push down the mountain, we could even make it to the village tonight and avoid our hunters altogether." They did push on through the night. With Orochimaru's endurance training, they were able to keep a furious pace, climbing down the mountain and rushing through the surrounding forest at speed. By the time they reached the gates, they were exhausted but happy. The Chunin guards at the entrance could barely contain his curled lip when he let them through. They found out later why that was. They were the first team down the mountain. Evidently, they just set something of a record. Chapter 14. Orochimaru's finger tapped against the steel, hand grasping it to try and bend the weapon. It didn't. An odd choice, he muttered. Most children wish for swords. Yeah, well I ain't most children, Ryoko shot back with air quotations. That and I got a wind affinity. What's best for that then, this? Her choice was something akin to the Fuma Shuriken, 4 large blades in a cross pattern. Except that, rather than 4 blades, it was more akin to 2 double-headed volgs with a ring in the center for the spinning motion. He gripped the weapon in his hand, tinkering for a moment before he disattached them to show off twin volgs. Whoever came up with this had certainly been eccentric. I would have no idea how to teach you to use this, he confessed. In truth, it'd be completely impractical without your wind element. But I do have a wind element, and with that, the weapon's unpredictability outweighs its awkwardness. No one will know how to fight against it, she reasoned. It's freestyle. She grinned. Orochimaru's lip curled. He didn't like it personally. He'd seen others fight with Fuma Shuriken as a distraction, a way to buy time or confuse, not win a battle. The weapon was meant for mid-range combat. It was too awkward for close range and too heavy for long range, unless you were Tsunade and could hurl the thing across a village. In his experience, discipline with sparse seasoning of surprise maneuvers won a battle. Not on-the-fly unpredictability. Especially when one had no more surprises left in their arsenal. But Ryoko's independence and quote-unquote wild behavior was not something he was going to be able to quash out. If he didn't do this for her now, she'd just do it herself later, and get herself injured in the process. At least this way he could make sure she didn't cut open an artery in her thigh or something when practicing. The steel was excellent. He could always say that about IWA. They had the best forges in the elemental nations. Only one that surpassed them was Kiri with its legendary blades, but those weapons were custom-made and unique for their umbu. IWA could mass-produce better steel overall. This piece could channel chakra, which was vital for the wind element, and was adding to its price tag. It was expensive. Almost prohibitively so. Still, his team had their weapons stolen and had set a new record. As a reward for that last bit, he'd been willing to buy them new shuriken, kunai, wire, tags, and one choice of another weapon. Quite frankly, he expected them all to simply go for swords. Naruto had declined, and so had Kyofu. Ryoko was the only one who took him up on the offer, and she was buying something he'd never seen before, let alone fought or knew how to teach her how to use. Why couldn't these children just be predictable? This is robbery. The shout was almost a deafening roar that echoed through the store. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow, handing Ryoko her strange choice of weapon back before he began to make his way towards the counter. Naruto was standing there, glaring at the man for all he was worth. Kyofu was not far behind. Where Naruto's glare, on his cherubic face, could be called cute by some, hers was just menacing. The store manager was glaring back at them and Orochimaru when the Sannin came into view. Is there a problem? The pale man drawled. He's charging us 3 times the price tag for all of these. It was Kyofu that answered. These things don't cost nearly half this in Konoha. Well, we ain't in Konoha, Leaf. The man barked back. If you people can't afford my goods, maybe you should head out back to that charity case you call a village. The 3 genin looked ready to do some harm, especially Naruto, who looked about ready to jump over the counter before the Sannin's hand on his shoulder held him back. Orochimaru patted him on the arm, smiling with a placid calm that set the boy's teeth on edge. Kyofu, Ryoko, please place your equipment on the counter so he can tally up a price for us. The 3 genin looked at each other before the 2 girls marched up, setting down their chosen assortment of kunai and shuriken along with Ryoko's custom Fuma shuriken. The man began racking up the price tag on his register, whole minutes passing with nothing but the grinding and pinging of edited sums. Finally, the final price tag was set. Nearly 3,000 yen. An absurd final price even with Ryoko's choice of weapon that could have accounted for triple the money for the amount of kunai and shuriken they'd each bought combined. Orochimaru cleared his throat. The man started speaking. now you listen here dash. The snake promptly ignored him, marching around the counter as the man kept on ranting. With a start, the three genin easily realized what was going on. Genjutsu. The snake hadn't taught them anything on the art, save for how to detect and dispel it, claiming it was the most difficult, but also the most dangerous, and they could see why that last part held true as it was displayed right before them. The store clerk was doing a tremendous job of throwing verbose insults at thin air. The serpent printed out the receipt, marched back around the counter, tossed each of them their weapons, and took more weapons from the counter, then began to march out with the three following behind him. "We have 1 month," he stated. "None of you were injured or suffered any complications in the whittling portion of the exam. So, each of you can participate in the spectator portion. I have no doubt Inoki will do whatever he can to sabotage your performance there." Ryoko snorted. "They already tried. We set a record anyway. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if that jackass left us higher up the mountain than he had to." "Don't think dash," the Sannin drawled. "That a single Chunin's little stunt will ultimately be the equivalent of whatever Inoki decides to throw at you. He won't try anything before the examinations that would simply be too suspicious and far too damaging to his reputation. But during the exam, accidents happen all the time here. It wouldn't take much to mask one up even with the eyes of everyone in the village on you. I dare say most within IWA would revel in the knowledge of your injury or death." He let the three of them stew in that for a moment. "You really are batshit crazy for bringing us here, huh?" Ryoko muttered for her team. Orochi smiled. A moment later he continues. "As such, the three of you will train a single discipline for the next month. Ryoko has already chosen her chakra element and weapon." The girl moved to open her mouth when she snapped it shut, looking at the expensive piece of metal now in her grip. Suppose she did it that. He turned to the remaining two. "But now that just leaves dash." Summons. Kyofu shouted, eyes gleaming before she realized what she'd done. She blushed in embarrassment as all eyes turned to her. I would like to learn summoning jutsu, please." The Sannin raised an eyebrow. "The summoning technique is difficult. Chances are you won't be able to master it in time." He drawled. "Yeah, well, high risk, high reward, right?" She ventured. "Summons are powerful with a multitude of uses besides you just standing on their heads. They drain a lot of chakras." He countered. "With your reserves, at best you'd be able to summon 3 decent-sized serpents before you fell to exhaustion. We can beef up my reserves. And even if we fail, no one has seen my techniques in action yet. Naruto and Ryoko attacked, I merely came up with the plan." The Sannin raised an eyebrow. "Merely isn't how the role of the strategist should be held. He'd have to have this discussion later." He stared at the girl, thinking. Finally, after nearly a minute, he nodded. "High risk, high reward it is," he determined. Then, he turned to Naruto. "Now you." He drawled. The blonde's hackles started to rise as they always did when the Sannin singled him out. The serpent cocked his head to the side. "I've been wondering something, and it might take some experimenting." Naruto blanched and the serpent realized that somehow, that had been the wrong thing to say. "Hell no!" he cried, backing up. "You're not slicing me up, you dash. That's called dissection." He interrupted before Naruto started going off on a tirade of sorts. "We will be practicing your last 2 elemental affinities." Naruto's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're not sticking me in a lab and cutting me up? We're just doing elemental training? That's it? Geez, princess, you don't have to be such a dash." Ryoko stopped. The 2 remaining team members looked at the girl, finding her wide, disbelieving eyes fixed on a spot off to the side. They followed her gaze and couldn't help their jaws falling slack. One of them thought, "Blow." The other, "No fucking way." The monster of Kiri looked every bit the part, striding across the training grounds towards them. He towered over everything, and to Naruto, who was especially small, he felt as though he was looking at a giant version of this childhood nightmare. If he saw a flash of red clouds, the only thing that snapped him out of a repeat of what Itachi had witnessed the day he re-met her brother, was the sight of the two children at his side. The beady-eyed shark man grinned, passing his eyes over each of them, and lingering a little more on the blonde that held something more than mere suspicion behind that gaze. Then he looked to Orochi. "Heh. Guess you weren't too crazy after all if your team busted the record. Beat mine by a whole 72 minutes. Did you want something?" Orochimaru questioned. "We have training to get to." "Proposal," he said with a chuckle. "Mine are the only genin from Kiri to make it through the first phase. Suna's out completely and you're obviously the only leaves." Orochimaru chuckled. "And how many from Iwa and Kumo? You didn't mention the lesser villages." Killua muttered, only to receive deadpan stares from both men as a response. Evidently, they held the lesser villages to a low standard or something. 2 from Kumo, 4 from Iwa. Kisame eventually said. 37 teams and only 8 made it through? Orochi nodded. Yup. Kisame chuckled. And 6 of them are gunning for you. It would seem it'd be best to keep your distance then. The Sannin crossed his arms. Not really. He seemed to think for a moment before he turned around, snapping his fingers. Haku. Tell us why. The Kiri Genin seemed to start for a moment before thinking. Well, was the tentative start. Once they're done with the Konoha team. That's right. He laughed. Kumo and Kiri have fought side by side before. They'll do it again now. Once the leaves are gone, you two will be dead center of the new bullseye. It doesn't matter. Kimimaro asserted. We can defeat them all. The shark man raised his hand and let it fall in a half-hearted backhand onto the boy's head, bopping him. No. You think you can beat them all. Kiri's not the only one with bloodlines, bone boy. But that still makes no sense. The Chunin examinations in Konoha have been one-on-one tournament-style competitions. Even if we were to cooperate, we'll still just be fighting dash. Why is that? Orochimaru interrupted. Kyofu's mouth clicked shut. What? Can you tell me why it is our exams have consisted primarily of tournament-style, one-on-one competitions for the spectator portion of the examinations? The Sannin drawled. The 3 Genin thought, but each came up with a blank. The Sannin spoke. Take in the entire picture. Konoha has a grand total of 8 large clans. The Senju, the Uchiha, the Hyuga, the Aburame, the Akimichi, the Inuzuka, the Yamanaka, and the Nara. And while 2 of those clans have no bloodlines, all of them have strict, regimented training. The only village that can slightly match that number of Kiki-Igenkai clans is Kiri, whom hold 6. We are the ones that are most likely going to field the strongest Genin, because ours will have the advantage of powerful clan techniques. Kisame nodded. Even if you end up losing, those Genin will end up making a good show, and will show off just how diverse those bloodline and clan techniques are. Even one lone Hyuga can burn through the rest of the inexperienced competition that doesn't know enough long-range jutsu to make up for it normally. And if they do, the proctors will be sure to rig the numbers to keep that person as far away from the Hyuga as possible, hoping someone else takes them out or weakens them. Konoha doesn't rig exams. Ryoko hissed, smirking after a moment. We leave that to the lesser villages. Oh, I like you, kid. The blue man laughed. But that's not how things work outside of La La Land. Insults or no insults. Orochimaru cracked his neck as he kept talking. Every Chunin examination on any shinobi's territory will be subjected to a bending of the rules as much as they can get away with to favor their own teams. In this examination, with such an overwhelming numerical advantage, what do you think Inoki will end up doing? Naruto came to the conclusion at once. He'll make it so we have to fight them all at once. A big group fight. Haku concluded. I saw it happen once before in one of Kirigakure's exams. Kumo and IWA prefer the tactic. Kumo's always been the most militaristic of the villages, so they enjoy a numerical advantage over all others. IWA has always used overwhelming force where it can be applied to most devastating effect. It's a strategy Tsunade, myself and Minato had to counter during the Third War, and why so many of them were in one area when Minato's Hiration was finally prepared. Suna prefers surprise attacks with small elite forces rather than a mass rush. They don't have the numbers for it. It's why they compensate with their art of puppetry. Kirinin just like getting close and biting your face off. Kisame offered with a shrug. So, what do you say? Allies? The three looked to Orochimaru. The Sannin shrugged. It'll be you taking the exam. You'll enjoy the advantages, and the risk. Yeah, risk. Kisame chuckled. Because remember kiddies, we can always be lying to stab you in the back later. The two girls and his own students looked at him oddly. Naruto took him at his word. Still, he wasn't allying with Kisame. He was allying with Haku. He could trust Haku. Let's do it. He declared first. Ryoko shrugged. Either way we're outnumbered. At least now it's got a shot of being 5-18 not 21-3. Kyofu nodded slowly. I suppose. Kisame grinned. Great. He reached behind him, literally plucked Haku by the shirt and shoved the genin towards Orochimaru. Heard you're gonna be doing some elemental manipulation stuff. See how you can help with that. Don't manhandle me, Kisame-sensei. Haku hissed. Yeah. Now, he pointed right at Ryoko, who stiffened in surprise and sudden dread as the man grinned. It's been a while since I've seen that weapon. Let's start practicing and see how well you can take an kicking. The silver-haired girl looked at her own sensei for salvation. Orochi shrugged, a smirk tugging at his lips. I told you I wouldn't know how to teach you. Seems to me as though you've just found someone who can. He stood, eyeing Haku, Kyofu and Naruto. Now let's see how much information we can beat into your skulls by month's end. I called you both here a week ago. Inoki hissed as his door opened and the two men entered. And we're responding to you now. Han's voice would have been soft if not for its deep resonance caused by the armor. What do you want, Inoki? The Tsuchikide's face darkened, a palpable fury radiating from his features. You do well not to test me right now, Gobi. When I call you here, I expect you to get here when I call you. Not at your own fucking convenience. Though his words started out in a normal tone, his volume had been increasing until, by the end, he was shouting, red-faced with a thick vein trailing down his forehead. The two Jinchuriki remained where they stood. While they were both powerful, they knew their place. Their lives were a precarious thing held by mere convenience of having them battle-ready, rather than their tenants be confined to genin with years left before they could be fully effective. They'd have left if any place was any different. People like them were born and tolerated because of convenience. People didn't want them in the village. Why trade one master with a leash for another with a whip? They railed against this status quo, particularly Han, who took every opportunity to push and tug at the leash around his neck. But they knew their place. Right now, though, Inoki seemed to be in no mood for that. It's been decades since either of them had seen the Tsuchikage so murderous. The Sandaime was getting ready to untie the leash holding back his attack dogs, it seemed. Roshi stepped forward, clearing his throat. What is it that you need? Naruto was beginning to dislike Earth Chakra. Wind he picked up quick, well, because he'd done it before. And when he did it before, he had the luxury of clones, and a giant vulpine in his gut. He doesn't have nearly so many luxuries now. So, he had to concentrate to pick up something new. Now mind you, that was always the intent, regain his techniques with age and time, and add to his experience and power as he grew older and got back to his teens. To try and pick this up now seemed more intimidating/frustrating than it perhaps should have been. Especially because Earth just felt so different. With wind you had to picture a blade. Two masses of chakra rubbing together until they formed a fine edge. This was because you couldn't see wind, so you had to picture it, and your chakra molded itself to bring about your will. With Earth it was just the opposite, picturing the Earth coming up, forming a dragon head, and eating Orochimaru wasn't gonna do jack. He had to make it do what he was imagining as opposed to imagining it and watching the results. It was a completely backwards process from what he was used to. That was why most of the time Earth techniques were more simplistic. Walls, spikes, mud. You could coax the unbending rock to move just so. Whereas wind was complete freedom. Orochimaru had a feeling this would be his hardest element to master, and he was getting the feeling the bastard was right. That was why they started this now, to see if he could get it down in time to try and practice at least some rudimentary water techniques. Before moving on to Kyofu though, the Sannin had surprisingly turned to Haku. "What is it you want to learn, girl?" Naruto perked up. "Aha." Haku was a girl this time. The Kiri Genin scowled. "Don't call me girl. My name's Haku." Naruto's eyes narrowed. Was that a demand to speak her name? Or did that imply that she wasn't a she? He could feel his teeth grinding together in frustration. Why couldn't someone just flat out say it? After a moment of Orochimaru's staring, Haku shrugged. "Kisame-sensei says my taijutsu is still sub-par. Show me," he demanded. Haku turned, taking up a stance before the Sannin scoffed. "Don't do a kata, girl. Hit me," he demanded. Haku flushed, whether it was from irritation or embarrassment none could really say, before she jumped, spun, and aimed a spin kick at the Sannin's face. It missed. The serpent hadn't even moved the foot past, so close to his face it ruffled his bangs. Haku cursed as she landed. The serpent raised an eyebrow. "More than sloppy," he surmised. "How in the world did you manage to remain so inept at close combat with a sensei like Hashige Kisame?" Shut up," she growled. "Kimimaro does the close-range combat on our team. I'm long-range support." She seemed to blanch as she realized her tone. "You are inept at it," he said. "Hey, stop putting Haku down," Naruto demanded. "Yeah," a distant voice cried through the trees. "Leave Princess's crush alone." He could all but hear the snickering laughs before the sharp, loud OW. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow but shrugged. "We'll work on that. Seeing as how Kisame is already helping Ryoko with her choice of weapon. Uzumaki, mind your own training, not hers." Kyofu dash. The girl stepped forward, all but dancing on her tiptoes. "I won't be giving you my serpents," he declared flatly, watching the girl deflate at the news. "Manda would more than likely eat you. You will memorize the 243 hand seals needed for the first summoning, then we will perform it once you have, and we will find you your contract animal." It was later in the day that the teams were, by the insistence of Ryoko and Naruto, choosing to eat together. For Naruto's part, he didn't trust Kisame. Not by a long shot. The man was part of the organization that had been hunting him his entire life. The man had helped Toby. That was enough to put him firmly on the do not trust/kill, as soon as needed/possible list right beneath Orochimaru. But Haku was a friend. The Haku he'd known had been his first real friend, and the one that taught him what it was to have precious people. Even with all the pain it had brought him, that lesson was still worth it. He'd like to be friends with this one if it was possible. And it's not like he could do anything about Kisame anyway. He hated being 6. Insufferable age. so he insisted they all eat together. Ryoko agreed because evidently, she wanted to continue insisting Kisame show off that awesome sword he had on his back. His teammates unanimously pushed for something other than ramen. They suggested sushi. Then Kisame glared. So, they settled on some bistro steak place. Yeah, well, I don't do delicate. I break bones, snap limbs and rupture organs with my fists. Does she look like she's got the body type for that? Kisame muttered, drinking straight out of a bottle. Naruto almost wept. Finally. Confirmation from someone that knew. Now, he could safely call her a she. That doesn't explain how you've allowed her to be so dismal at it. Orochimaru shot back, drinking a bit more conservatively out of a saucer. In the room. The girl hissed, blushing in quiet anger. She hasn't needed it. The man grinned. You should see her with a Senbon. Yeah, she sucks at close combat. It's a shame you'll never get there. Again. I in the damn room. Kisame-sensei. Kimimaro spoke up for the first time in the whole day. You're giving away tactical information. He's been doing that all day. Kyofu muttered to herself, though Ryoko heard it snickering. Kisame waved his student off. Meh. You'll live. You won't always fight an enemy that's completely ignorant of you. I suppose not. It would be rather difficult to find such when it's being broadcast in the middle of a crowded restaurant. The bone wielder drawled. The blue man shrugged. Details. He drank again. Is it just me, or is he basically confirming that they're planning to betray us? Ryoko questioned. Kind of a crappy sneak attack. Naruto ventured. Haku slapped her forehead. This is the weirdest table conversation ever. It doesn't involve 2 summonings, a rope dash, and 5 livers. Kisame, strangely, was the one who finished for the Sannin as both gulped down their drinks. You haven't touched weird yet. The blue man laughed, with Orochimaru nodding sagely. The students inched away. When their food arrived, with Kisame ordering a slab of ribs that he was swallowing, bones and all by the by, the Kirin leaned forward. All right, here's the girl will learn how to use that weapon enough to put the pointy end in someone else, and not herself, within 3 weeks. You get Haku to dash. Naruto turned towards the dark-haired girl seated across from him, and the pale-haired boy. So why are you guys a 2-man team? He asked, turning his gaze from one to the other. We're not a team, truth be told. The Kagaya answered. We're both apprenticed to sensei. In order to advance to Chunin, Mizukage-sama deemed our skills more than made up for a lack of a third member, and formed a quasi-team. Haku shrugged. Zabuza-sensei is my normal sensei and Kimimaro-san is Kisame-sensei's. That's why Kisame-sensei doesn't know how to teach me very well. None of his techniques are suited to my and Zabuza's style. Naruto nodded in interest, not noticing how Kyofu and Ryoko giggled beside him, figuring he was hanging on every word when he was really remembering how much destruction Kisame could bring on a place to level it. Where Zabuza with the silent killing was far more precise. Kisame and Zabuza-sama competed in order to be the ones to escort us here. She finished. Really? Naruto asked, somewhat excited. He remembered how strong Zabuza was. That must have been some fight. Haku's eyebrow twitched in irritation. They flipped a coin. She growled drily. Best 2 out of 3. Something told him Zabuza wasn't exactly in the realm of Zabuza-sama in this version of history. I don't feel bad, Haku-chan. Ryoko nudged her shoulder against the girl. Naro-chan here will fight for you. The doors of his office opened, and in marched the one student he had left in the village. You hear the news yet? She asked, smirking as she marched into the room, planting herself on the chair. Sarutobi was biting down on his pipe. wisps of thin smoke rising from its cup. Do you mean, did I hear that the Konoha team recently managed to set a new record in the first exams they've attended in Iwagakure since the Chunin exams were established? No. I don't believe the grapevine reached me yet. She let out a laugh. This is good. The cloud of that alone will draw in clients, and it definitely makes a hell of a statement to IWA and Kumo. H took in a deep breath, pulling the pipe from his teeth as he settled back in his chair and looked at her. My lessons at subtlety clearly rubbed off on you the most. I almost didn't see the pink elephant dancing across my face holding the make nice with Oro sign. Her face scrunched up in a displeased scowl. All right, fine, you old grump. You've been sulking up here miserable for 3 weeks now. Yeah, I was pissed at him and worried about Naruto too, but come on. Clearly, they were ready if they managed to set a damn record. Isn't that enough to bring out a smirk? A smile? A chuckle maybe? He shook his head, muttering to himself under his breath as he seemed to flounder over whether he should smoke and talk or talk then smoke. It isn't about that. Then what is it dash? It's about the fact that neither of you know responsibility. She rolled her eyes. Oh, great, now I'm being dragged into th dash. You are. He interrupted again, and the slug princess was starting to realize that she was about to be the subject of a tirade that seems to have been building up for a while. The old man took a breath, opening his mouth to speak before he stopped himself, closing his eyes and taking another deep breath before his head hung down. Tsunade-chan. Just go, I'd rather not talk right now. Her eyes softened. He looked worn. Sensei, are you okay? It was a moment before he took a breath, lifting his head again. I'm supposed to be relaxing, he said, confusing her. I'm supposed to be in my home, relaxing. Someone else should be sitting here. I gave him the job. But he up and quit on me before the remains of my office could gather a film of dust in storage. He shook his head. And I am just so tired, he finally said as he looked at her. But who can I trust with it? Who can I leave it to? I have one student about to get married, start a family of her own. It's enough responsibility. Are you blaming me for getting married? She questioned, incredulous. Never. I know this job does not go well with parenthood. She didn't say anything to that. The estranged relationship between her sensei and his eldest son, Asuma, was something of an open secret. And she didn't want that to be her. She loved Dan, just as sensei had loved his wife and children. That didn't save them from the long hours, sleepless nights and emergency conferences that cut into every hour of the day every day of the week. She didn't want his life to be hers, and if that was something he took into account, she was grateful. He took another breath, smoking before tossing his pipe on the desk, bits of tobacco leaves sprinkling out of the cup as it tilted over. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. And then I have another that goes pulling games for his own amusement. Looking to taunt Iwagakure and the whole world with his success. Dragging the daimyo straight into the crossfire and putting us all at risk of another war when he almost laughed then, but despite the smile it was something that sounded like a scoff, or even a sob. We would even have trouble fighting one of the lesser villages. He'd said I have 800 active shinobi when before I had well above 1,000. I have an economy struggling to hold itself afloat with the far reduced volume of missions we can take, no Jinchuriki. And that's one secret that once unearthed it'll be open season on us. I'm entering talks with Kumo as a backup in case soon as hostility boils over with their daimyo hiring us for missions, even though I know they're far less trustworthy. I'm trying to hold together a trade agreement with Kiri when we have no funds to hold a merchant navy together. I'm trying to keep an eye on Danzo and whatever he's been scheming recently and the only one I could possibly have left this to is dead. He shook his head, and the only other is a man who puts children in danger for his own amusement, with you, and I just giving him a faux pass and laughing at his ploys or grinning when it turns out he was right, and I am just so sick of it. His last words made her jump. He never shouted, but this one had just swallowed the room. It was the despondent look in his eye that truly brought her short though. She didn't see anger there, just disappointment. He was disappointed that his fears had evidently been confirmed. He had no one he could count on. She'd never seen him like this. He looked withered and aged far more than his normal vibrant facade. She wanted to say she was sorry, but it just seemed so worthless. Still. I'm sorry, Saro-sensei. He took a breath, still looking down at the table. He nodded. When I'm gone one day, he said after a moment. Promise me you won't let yourself accept this job, Tsunade. Slowly his hands reached back down, gripping the file before angling it up to continue where he'd left off. His momentary lapse left behind now like so many other things. You almost got it that time, she praised. Naruto scowled. It's an ant hill. Which is more than you had before. Haku smiled. You're getting there. Naruto squinted. Can't tell if teasing. He growled aloud. It was supposed to be a spike. She giggled. So, after this you plan on learning water? The blonde nodded. Then he glared down at the dirt at his feet as though it was guilty of some grave crime. Yeah, once I can make more than a dam and hill. She smiled again. It's not so bad. You're catching on quick for your age. She frowned. Which reminds me, how old are you? This many. Naruto teasingly held up his 2 hands, 5 fingers, and a thumb on display. All of you are old. She fiddled with one of her senbon. Orochimaru was gone for the day. Apparently having gone with Kyofu somewhere to find her summon animal or something. How exactly that worked Naruto didn't know. He just signed the contract and that had been that. The nuances of forming a brand new contract that hadn't existed before were completely lost on him. And no, those things weren't just sign here, and we pledge eternal service. There were details and things that had to be hammered out and agreed on. Summons didn't just accept anyone. Gamabunta, despite all his bluster, had trusted Jiraiya, and had recognized him as both Minato's son and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The Toads wanted him to be their summoner since before he could walk. Jiraiya had been the one to do all the work on the original summoning agreement. Needless to say, that wasn't the norm. Orochimaru and Tsunade had followed his lead on that and had made their contracts later in life. He didn't know how dangerous Katsuya was, but Manda would eat people that tried to summon snakes and were found unworthy. One had to be careful when they tried to make a contract. Hence why Orochi was following her. If things went to hell, he could go into a fight with the beasts. He lowered his hands. So, he ventured. What's your other sensei like? He fished for conversation even as he answered his own question. Big, scary, uses a huge sword, sharp teeth, no eyebrows, gray skin, eats children and small animals. Zabuza sensei is great? She said quickly. He's one of Kirigakure's 7 swordsmen, Kisame sensei is another. But Zabuza sensei is the greatest user of the silent killing techniques of the Shodai Mizukage. Will be scaring off every potential boyfriend in the future, probably by growling angrily and glaring maliciously, or just plain old cutting off an arm or 2. He smiled at his inner jokes. What can you tell me about Orochimaru Dano? He poisoned us, and he bites. The blonde deadpanned. She raised an eyebrow. Bites? Why is it that the poisoned us part is the one that takes a back seat here? He still nodded, though, remembering the forest of death. The first forest of death. Oh yeah. You want an unnecessarily creepy fight. He's the one to go see. Bites, peeling skin, sword out of stomach, licking. He shuddered at the last one. Haku's eyebrow rose. This was certainly not what she had been picturing for the legendary death dealer. You're making this up, she accused. Naruto was about to open his mouth when he realized that he might have just okay, he did trip over his own blatant stupid here and just spouted a whole bunch of things about a guy that he hadn't seen yet. He grinned. Had you going though, right? Then he frowned. Seriously though. He did poison us. She nodded. Zabuza and Kisame-sensei have their eccentricities, but what you were saying was just absurd. Again, why do you not seem to give a rat's ass on this poisoning thing? He decided to move the subject away from the snake. So, you and Kimimoko are bloodline users? Kimimaro. Right, that guy. Why could he never remember the name? He was normally good with names. We are. She said. He's of the Kagaya clan, they can manipulate their bones. Which I'm sure you gathered since Kisame-sensei keeps calling him Bone Boy. So, what about you? What are your skills to graduate so early? I'm just awesome. Naruto laughed, catching the unsubtle shift in conversation. He wanted Haku and him to be friends, but he wasn't about to brag. Especially when he had very little to brag about. There were a lot of things he could do. But there were more things he couldn't. The Rasengan, his shadow clones, the summoning technique, his sage mode. These were all staples of his fighting style that he simply couldn't do yet because he couldn't explain them yet. He didn't have access to the shadow clone technique, he didn't know Jiraiya, and the Rasengan had never been taught to him, he didn't know the summoning technique, let alone be able to just summon toads. He could just pull all of this out of his ass, but there were only so very much people would buy from my false memories told me to do it before they called him out on his bullshit. His graduation was less about how exceptional his power was and more on how quickly he learned things. Sure, his experience in the war gave him more options and skills per SE, but he was still very limited. In comparison to Haku, who despite being younger no doubt already knew and had mastered a great deal of her bloodline, along with Kimimaro, they might be younger than they'd been when he fought them the first time and thus weaker, but they could very likely be stronger than him as it stood right now anyway. Gaara had supposedly had to bury the bone guy a mile deep. The only weapon he had that could match those two Kiki-Igenkai was his wind element, and that's if Haku didn't pump him full of Senbon before he could get too close. Still, that would change. It was just the anxiousness of waiting for the change to come that was killing him. He grinned, starting up some of his hand seals again. This was enough of a break. Hey Haku, after the exam, and we're done beating each other up. He said after a moment. Wanna be friends? She smiled at him, somewhat bemusedly at the innocence of his question, and he suspected that she suspected Ryoko's teasing of his supposed crush was in fact more than just teasing. But if he was gonna be stuck in this 6-year-old body, he was gonna use the one advantage it offered. Cuteness. She let out a soft laugh. Sure, we can, Naruto-kun. Chapter 15. The Chunin exams Naruto remembered were held in an arena, one big enough to sit 8,000 spectators or so, surrounded on 3 sides by rows of bleachers and open to the forest on the 4th. It had been built by the Sandaime when the Chunin examinations were agreed upon at the end of the last war. Iwa's Chunin exam was held in a barren field. Konoha wanted to not only have the title of strongest of the 5. They wanted to look the part too. IWA was a bit less extravagant in their efforts. The only people that mattered were high-paying clients, and those high-paying clients could pay the pittance of AD rank assignment it cost Genin to raise these platforms up in a day or so. That and because a field of nothing but dirt and rock was something of an advantage for Rock Ninja. Anyone who wanted to could show up. There were no admission fees, unlike Konoha's exams. Good luck trying to see anything if you arrive late though. The only people with proper seats were those who had them sitting on wooden towers that had been built before the exams. In other words, the nobles from around the village with a pretty penny to spend, or visiting dignitaries. Or of course the Kage's seat. That tower stood higher than all the others, wider too, wide enough for civilians to climb up on its support struts to find themselves a better view. The reason for its girth became clear when, atop its plateau, one could see 5 chairs beneath a gazebo-like tarp, spread out for those that would be observing the exam from its shaded vantage point. It was tall enough for Kota to see as he rode out of the village, still half a mile away. "Do you think we'll feel a breeze up there?" he drawled. "It looks like the sun will be biting the flesh off your face today." "Who can say?" Orochimaru shrugged, walking alongside the man, his students trailing behind him. "You didn't bring your armor, Magajiro-sama." Kota gave the Sannin a sidelong glance. "Have you ever tried sitting for hours on end in it?" Hashirama knew how to forge something to protect you. That doesn't necessarily mean it was made to be comfortable. It might be decidedly less comfortable to be stoned by angry civilians. The snake replied drily. Kota hummed. Anoki wouldn't try anything now. Too open and far too damaging to his reputation, but some of those villagers were looking more than a little miffed now that he cared to look. "Can I trust you to guard me from thrown rocks and shuriken, courtesy of Academy hopefuls Orochimaru? It would be a rather embarrassing way to die." The Sannin chuckled. Agreed, Magajiro Dano. By the time they arrived where the exam was to take place, the Jounin were beginning to push the crowd back, forming the ring for the actual fight. They would create a wall of elite protectors between the genin and the civilians to keep stray attacks from cutting the crowd to pieces. It also gave them a front row view. Between the press of people backpedaling and the people still pouring into the area behind them, there was a sheer crush of humanity that made progress, even with the Jounin escorts opening a path for them through the crowds, a decidedly slow thing. Still, before long they had made it to the base of the burgeoning tower, with Kota dismounting easily, his men taking hold of the horse with 2 more flanking him. He looked at the Konoha team he had dragged himself into enemy territory to supervise and do his part to keep safe by his mere presence. The man smiled. "You look ready," he appraised. Damri - the silver-haired girl seemed to catch herself, her face turning scarlet in embarrassment. I mean Dash." He laughed. He didn't know the children very well. The trappings of power always prevented easy conversation. They would not know how to address him because of his station. He wouldn't know how to address them due to their differing societies and the massive age gap. But he supposed for now he could offer one comfort. He fell onto one knee in front of them, getting to eye level. "I met your Shodan once. Did you know that?" The 3 shook their heads. "I was just a boy." He remembered 8 years at most. "I asked him how it was I could become as powerful as him. Do you know what he told me?" They shook their heads, offering each other curious looks. "He said I was already stronger than he was. That the strength of those that came before is carried by the new generation. And so, every generation will be stronger than the last. And to date, I've never known Hashirama to have been wrong." He stood dusting off his knees before he looked down at them. "The 3 of you are the newest generation. So, you 3 are the best Konoha has ever had to offer. I know you'll do us proud." The children bowed. "Thank you, Magajiro-sama," Kyofu said respectfully. "We promise to do our very best to win." The man nodded, before looking to Orochimaru. "I'll leave you to your students. Come join me when you're done." Just like that, the man turned and began marching up the stairs that wound around the wooden tower like a serpent, winding to the top. Orochimaru wasted no time before walking to stand in front of his 3 students and began speaking. "Remember, there can be only one winner in this fight," he drawled. "You are allies with Kiri due to convenience. Do not turn your back on them. Do not assume they will not do their utmost to win just as you will. Once you feel the tide against IWA has irrevocably turned in your favor, they are your next greatest threat. The Yuki and Kagaya bloodlines are strong forces that beat back many challengers in the time of unending war. Do not underestimate them, but more importantly, do not be caught off guard by them. He who strikes first strikes twice." He saw Naruto frown, even as the other 2 girls nodded in understanding. Whatever infatuation the boy had with the Yuki girl, he could only hope it wouldn't cost the team once push came to shove. If it did, well, it'd be enough of an embarrassment for the boy to serve as a good enough lesson. You've trained yourselves well. It was as close to open, unabashed praise as they were going to get from him. Now go out there and show these IWA fools that even without the yondaime they're only fit to serve as our bootlicks. And without another word he turned and marched after the daimyo and his guards. Magajiro finished climbing the last step, grunting as he did. He was getting old already. His joints and muscles aching even if his heart was still beating normally. He found Inoki already waiting there. Beside him was another man he'd never met but could recognize easily enough. A hulking mountain of muscle, white hair framing a scowling face as he stared down at the hissing mass of people below. Inoki turned, facing him as he heard his approach. Nodding. No bow this time, no, he wouldn't be getting any of those today without offering some of his own first. Magajiro Dano. The daimyo nodded. Suchikage Dano. He turned to the other man who turned to face him. Reikage Dano. I looked at him, offering little more. Kota made his way closer to his designated seat, trailing his eyes down towards the widening ring of people in order to give the Genin plenty of room to fight. Jounin could easily defend against any attack a Genin could pull off. But there were always some outliers that could pull off some crazy stunts every once in a blue moon. So, it's true. The Reikage looked back to him again. You actually had the nerve to show up yourself. Kota smiled. It was as close to an open threat as had been offered during his stay, not counting Inoki's granddaughter of course. Of course I did. In my shoes, you'd like to see your Genin win as well. A's lip curled. Kota found his candor to be a pleasant breath of fresh air. So much posturing already. A feminine voice replied, drawing their eyes towards a copper-haired female. She was younger than any of them had been expecting. Early 20s at best. Rumors had been flying over a dispute for the position of Yondaime Mizukage that had threatened to break into all-out civil war. If she'd managed to oust her competitor or competitors, then she must be more powerful than her age warranted. Mizukage Dano. Inoki greeted, watching as the woman was soon flanked by two monstrously tall men wielding massive blades. The demon of the bloody mist and the monster of Kiri. Besides himself, May had brought the greatest escort. I had brought none, the only other Kumonin here were the sensei of the two participating teams. Kota had. It looks like we're all here then. The serpent slithered out of the floor, his body melting out of the wooden panels at their feet with that smirk plastered over his face, hair falling over one eye as the other glinted in a practiced look that was meant to inspire unease. Inoki's lip curled at the sight of him. What he wouldn't give to wipe that smug little smile permanently off his face. I assume your respective teams are ready. He addressed them as he turned away and stepped onto the edge of the platform. With no words of protest emerging from any, he decided to proceed. All right, let's get this started then. Ryoko-san. The silver-haired girl's head snapped up at the sound of Haku calling her name, swiveling her eyes this way and that way. She found the dark-haired girl waving over the heads of the crowd to get their attention. Hey! She spoke towards Kyofu and Naruto. This way. Pushing through the thin crowds near the front lines, the three students made their way closer towards their de facto allies. Once they did, it was easy to find the IWA teams. That them? Naruto asked, squinting to try and get a better look. It was Kimimaro that nodded. It is. There is at least one bloodline user in Iwa's team, though we've not been informed of who it is, or what bloodline it is. Well, that's helpful. Took a load off my mind right there. Ryoko muttered. The bone wielder scowled at the sarcasm while Haku giggled. Still squinting, Naruto decided to offer a bit of sagely advice. Look for the weird-looking one. He nodded to himself. Bloodline users always look weird. Excuse me. His Sakura angry danger senses were going off at Haku's deathly sweet tone. I mean, that is all of them except for pretty Yuki clan members. He ventured with one foot poised to run away. Haku patted him on the head, a sprinkle of frost glimmering there, sending a shiver down his spine. Nice try. Smooth princess. Any information on the Kumo teams? He asked, desperately trying to change the subject. None. It seems that they were skilled enough to make it through the first portion of the exam, but not much more than that. They're average at best. Don't underestimate your enemy. Kyofu muttered, remembering how many times Orochimaru had hammered those words into her. They might still surprise you. IWA will be heading straight for you. Haku said. Kumo and Kiri are also bitter enemies, they'll most likely target us if they don't go after you. Hold out until Kimimaro and I defeat the Kumo teams, then we'll return to help you with the IWA Genin. Hey! Ryoko chuckled. What makes you think you guys will be done first? She spun the custom Fuma shuriken in her grip once before bringing it to a stop. The rock heads won't know what hit em. We're outnumbered 3-1. Kyofu pointed out. They'll most likely try to isolate us, one team for each one of us. The fourth team means at least one of us could be subject to fighting 6. If that happens, try to evade and stall while one of us deals with a weaker team. They can't all be up to par here. Wouldn't it be better to regroup? Naruto asked, frowning. That's what they always did in the wars. Isolated units got picked off, unified men and women, even outnumbered, were a bigger beast to try and chew. It would normally, but Earth techniques when they're not defensive can get pretty big. Just because one of us can dodge it doesn't necessarily mean we all can. Us bunching together in this case just increases the chances of us getting hit by one of the bigger attacks meant for someone else. Or worse, that the Genin can pummel us with coordinated volleys. You think they know elemental manipulation? Ryoko asked. Kyofu shrugged. We do. She answered simply. You think they have their own batshit crazy sensei that teaches Genin high Chunin level chakra exercises? They might. Point taken. Kyofu nodded. Isolation is best in this situation, I think. Naruto's frown deepened. I don't know. The Genin looked, finding one of the IWA Jounin staring at them. Get out here. It's time to start. Confused but obeying, the Genin marched out of the front lines of the crowd, following the Jounin proctor as he led them to the center of the ring. Naruto and the others could now get a clear look at their competition. What are you doing here? Akatsuchi had never seen Kuro-chan stand so very stiff. A metal rod would have had more curve than her at the moment. Or him for that matter. Both children turned, eyes trailing up to find the stern face of Katsuchi glaring down at them. Weren't you forbidden from leaving the estate for the duration of the exams, young lady? We just wanted to see. She defended. I wasn't planning on doing anything. Honest. The Jounin's jaw twitched beneath his skin. Turning his eyes towards Akatsuchi, his daughter's partner in crime for half their stunts. And you, Aka? The boy opened his mouth to speak when Kuro jumped in again. I went to go get him. She barked. More than likely he went to get you out of that house. His daughter had been absolutely miserable for the past month. But her misery of being locked indoors was only overshadowed by her self-loathing at having Inoki so angry with her. The old man had been furious, and rightfully so. Kuratsuchi had risked a flat-out open war. But more than that, she risked her own life. Even if she didn't fully comprehend the ramifications of her actions, it wasn't something the old man could do anything but get angry at, child or no. Still, a month of not leaving the house along with the other punishments leveled on her would drive anyone crazy. He supposed an hour or two wouldn't exactly spoil the girl or spark the fourth war. Stay here, don't move. Once this is done, you're both going with me back home. They nodded. He marched off to join the wall of Jounin as his father's voice cut through the morning air. In the duties of a shinobi. Anoki began, his voice easily carrying over the hum of the crowd far below with the chakra carrying his voice. Our roles are not limited to espionage and silent assassinations. While darkness and shadows are our element often, we are called upon to lend our might to the open battlefield against the enemies of our daimyo, be they samurai or other ninja. He paused, letting the words settle. For this reason, this part of your Chunin examination shall be one of open combat. You have no allies in this battle. Only one team can be the victor. Your objective is to see yourself and your team safely through the chaotic rampage of the battlefield, and be the ones to emerge victorious. Take your places, wait for the signal to be given, and then fight well. He stepped back, taking his seat between the Rai and Mizukage. A scene displeased, Mei was carefully neutral. It was a thin pretense to tip the scales in favor of IWA. But the same was always true no matter what village hosted the exams. It was his turn this year. So, the snake was right, huh? We really are gonna have to fight them all. Naruto frowned. Ryoko nodded. Yeah. I get ya. Kinda hoping to avoid this headache too, huh? Yeah. He grumbled. He was still going to win. He'd be damned if he lost to Genin after everything he'd been through, but it was still gonna be a tough fight. They made it to their corner of the makeshift ring. Going clockwise from their left there was an IWA team, Haku's team, a Kumo team, an IWA team, another Kumo team, and finally the last two IWA teams before coming back around to them. The proctor made it to the center of the ring. Are all the teams ready to begin? He panned his eyes around him to see if there were any objections. Take note that this is your last opportunity for any last-minute preparations or objections if you're injured or ill. Come on, start already. Kuratsuchi growled, glaring out from where she stood between Akatsuchi and slightly behind her father. Who do you think's gonna win? I heard those two from Kiri are really strong. We'll win, of course. She scoffed as though it were obvious. Why are you so sure though? Because Aka. She huffed. We've got more teams. That Kiri team isn't even complete. The Leaf team have a pipsqueak for a third member, and the Kumo teams are nothing special. How do you know? Shut up, I just do. Are you, what was the word? Posturing. Kitsuchi threw back helpfully with a smirk over his lips. Yeah. That. I am not. Begin. The proctor jumped back, towards the edge, vanishing from the center. For a while, no one really moved. Then, with little more than a smile and a wink as a warning, Naruto took off to their right, making a beeline straight for the two IWA teams. Hey! How many IWA teams does it take to take down one Genin? He laughed, all but frolicking towards them. Kyofu and Ryoko nodded. Evidently Naruto was determined to take the lion's share. They'd have to be quick with theirs. He was strong. But he was still only 6. The two girls split up and rushed their own enemies. Kisame laughed. Now that kid knows how to have fun. It's arrogant of him. A snorted, casting a sideways glance towards Orochimaru. I expected better from the so-called death dealer. Was it brash tactics like this that brought you to heal Inoki? Kota snorted in laughter. The man was bold. But to criticize brash tactics when he just insulted his host and another dangerous shinobi was rather bold-faced by anyone's standards. Orochimaru couldn't look more bored. Naruto smiled as he swerved mid-run, avoiding a hail of thrown shuriken as he rushed headlong into the 6 Genin. The first one that reached him tried to kick. The blonde rolled beneath it, came up behind the boy, latched onto his back like some demon gremlin from hell, climbed up higher, using chakra to keep himself in place before he solidly boxed the Genin's ears. The slap of his hands and the additional wind chakra heat infused into his palms, rushed into the ear canal and instantly ruptured the eardrums and disrupted inner ear functions. The genin screamed, clutching at the now bleeding ears before tripping over himself, the vertigo hitting him a second later as he tried to hold down his stomach. Naruto laughed as the other genin shouted out their anger at the injury of their teammate. The whole group attacked this time. Naruto grinned, tensing his muscles as wind chakra danced around his limbs, a gust picking up around him before this side of the ring was blanketed in a dust storm, swallowing the 7 genin instantly and hiding him from view. Up above, Kisame was giggling under his breath like an idiot, snickering through his teeth. Boxed ears, haha. Can't say I would have thought of that. Konoha's wind elements are rare, Mei said contemplatively. He seems to have a remarkable grasp of it given his age. He didn't use hand seals to cause the dust to rise. She looked to Orochimaru in askance. The Sannin would have flatly ignored her altogether, if Kuta hadn't chuckled, taking his cue to step in on her behalf. Trained him well, did you, Oro? He's always picked up things quickly. Wind has come very naturally to him. He offered, absolutely nothing at all really. Meanwhile, Zabuza and Kisame were making their own entertainment. Kimamaro's already taken down one. And done Jack with the other 2. Haku's ripping her 3 to pieces. She'll cut them up good, but she'll be tired by the time those pinpricks take down any of them. Betcha she'll need help for chakra exhaustion after this is over. Bet your boy's gonna be running around chasing his enemy for the duration of his fight. He'll still get like a rushing bull, eventually has to crash into something. Mei sighed, irritated. You're blessed with 2 wind elements, it seems. Anoki grunted, drawing everyone's attention towards the silver-haired Ryoko, whose strange weapon was now nearly 3 times its previous size, for razor-sharp blades spinning rapidly in her hand as she stalked the 3 Iwa genin in front of her like prey. The girl's weapon spun almost languidly in her hand. She seemed confident, and while that could definitely be true given that it was a genin, it could just as easily be a blustering bluff in the face of 3 opponents. If she waited very long, the genin might come up with a decent enough strategy to attack her with. Luckily, Ryoko was never known for her patience. The silver-haired leaf genin rushed forward with a battle cry, a length of ninja wire tied around the center ring of her weapon as she swung it around like a massive guillotine at the 3 Iwa genin that scrambled to get out of reach. Inside of his self-made dust bowl, Naruto grinned as he formed set of seals. Kyofu cursed, abandoning her hand seals for her fire technique to block one of the genin's approaching kicks, lashing out with her own. The genin dodged before his friend came around to strike at her exposed side with a kunai. She contorted her body, wincing as the muscles in her back made their protest sharply known before reaching around and latching onto the boy's wrist, twisting harshly before yanking him forward and all but shoving him into his friend. She formed her hand seals, a gokakyu exploding out of her lips that was immediately quelled by the kunoichi's water technique coming between them. Kyofu cursed, tossing shuriken even as she was forced to dodge and weave away from the other 2 that were now recovered and attacking. She leapt back, another fireball making them scatter and giving her some breathing room. She landed and was forced to fall flat onto her back as an earth spike rose up to gore her on its surface. The Iwa genin were on her already. She pulled out a fist full of explosive tags, throwing them up in the air, letting them fall like rain before she made them burn with a flick of chakra. The concussive force battered her body and knocked the wind out of her. It hurt, her ears were ringing. But heat rises. The brush of uncomfortable fire against her flesh was gone in the barest instant before she was already pulling herself off the floor and onto her feet, rushing away from where she'd fallen. She landed and cursed as the kunoichi in the team was already attacking her, not giving her a moment to breathe. She took her stance, blinking the blur from her eyes and trying to will the ringing from her ears as she braced herself. The move to lunge. Then she was neck deep in the ground. Hey! What the hell is this? It was a basic earth jutsu. Kyofu blinked, confused and startled. Her confusion was partially diffused though when a tuft of blonde hair and two blue eyes rose up from the barren dirt at their feet. Turning and looking before it began drifting closer towards Ryoko's fight, sinking fully into the ground a moment later. Kyofa didn't waste another second, rushing forward and delivering a full, unobstructed kick at the girl's face that might have broken something in the process of knocking her unconscious. She smirked at the last two boys. 3 against 1 was pushing her to use her jutsu to level the playing field. Her reserves were the weakest of the team, even if she was the oldest. 2 against 1 she could manage and hold back her jutsu repertoire for later. She tossed a glance at the Kagaya boy who barely even flinched as an explosive tag went off point blank in front of him, looking decidedly bored as the smoke cleared. It seemed as though they might need it. If Kisame could see her expression clearly or hear her, he would have found something of a kindred spirit in his quasi-4-month-long student. She was laughing like the crazed resident of a psych ward. The weapon was swung up and around, over her head and abreast, the massive wind shuriken forming a dervish of razor-sharp blades that battered aside their kunai and projectile weapons with howling gusts, and kept them far, far away as they tried to gain enough distance to not be threatened by the thing. It was only when she felt sweat trickle down her temple that she realized just how much chakra she'd been eating up. Instantly, she pulled the weapon back, beginning to feel the edges of weariness eating at her as the adrenaline began to taper off. The other genin pounced seeing her relentless assault finally abate. If it wasn't for the fact that they'd wasted most, if not all their kunai, shuriken, and a few explosive tags trying to get to her beforehand, she might have been worried over having been drawn into a trap. She gripped one end of her weapon, the coating of wind chakra over it now was gossamer thin, not enough to drain her, but enough to give the weapon enough of an extra bite to make it worth more than its awkward unwieldy nature. The first boy threw shuriken that she batted aside with a swing of the 4 blades in front of her. The second genin was a split second after his friend, throwing his weapons in such a way to tangle her own with ninja wire. Several were sliced right off. Some did take hold in parts of the weapon she wasn't focusing her energies on though. The third landed behind her, weapons drawn to drive them into her shoulders. She let go, stepped back, into the swing, so it was his forearms that struck her collarbones rather than his blades. She focused chakra into the back of her head, and threw herself back. Her smile was vicious at the feel of warm blood at the back of her head, and the satisfying crunch of bone and cartilage. She reached up, grabbing one wrist before pulling it forward and down, crashing the elbow against her shoulder with a solid impact that, while not breaking the tough joint, certainly hurt, making him drop the weapon with a scream. The other 2 genin charged at her. She reached into her pouch, drawing a handful of shuriken, cutting her hand in her haste. She held on tight though, and threw them at the genin, wind chakra infused into them. One of the boys ducked, forming hand seals before slamming his hands down on the ground, 2 earth walls sprouting up between them and the shuriken. The bladed stars struck the stone, nearly going straight through the packed earth. One genin, the one that had formed the technique, was unaffected because he was crouching. The other, standing at his full height, got a face full of dirt and dust as the shuriken speckled in his face with their near exit. He coughed and sputtered, eyes tearing up as he tried to wipe them in order to see. Rag. The next thing he knew, the crazy silver-haired girl was punching through the earth wall, fist coated with wine chakra that she used to just drill straight through it, before grabbing him by the face and using her momentum to slam his skull against the packed earth at their feet. She moved to turn, but before she could there was an arm coiled around her neck in a brutally strong chokehold. She choked as she tried to suck down a startled gasp, coughing as her hands rose to elbow the genin behind her, only for him to move out of the way, grip the back of her head to avoid the headbutt she was about to do and squeeze. She grits her teeth, trying to throw him off as she lunged forward. She opened her eyes finding the one whose nose she'd broken approaching. His friend was regaining his bearings as well. She didn't want to cut off his arms and kill him with wind blades, but if this asshole didn't get off her. Dynamic entry. And with a moment of déjà vu, Naruto appeared from flat out nowhere, giggling as he latched onto Broken Nose's head and started beating him with the ring end of kunai. The one holding her slackened his grip for a moment in surprise, enough for her to move her head and bite. Hard. She didn't stop until she felt the coppery tang of blood in her mouth. When he finally let go, she turned and hurt him. Badly. She turned to the last boy once she was done, who was already calling to forfeit and all but running towards the jounin as Naruto gleefully let go of his choking, half-drowning teammate with the bloody nose. She panted, rubbing her own neck and spitting to try and get rid of the taste in her mouth. Thanks. Naruto grinned. No problem, I'm just about dash. Before he could finish his sentence, the Naruto before her vanished, leaving behind only a mound of dirt in his shape that quickly fell to pieces. Atsuchi Bunshin. Her eyes widened, turning around in time to see the dust cloud beginning to dissipate. More than that though, she saw her teammate a second before he hit the ground, evidently having been hit, or thrown. She could see 4 other IWA Genin in the last vestiges of the dust cloud that weren't moving. There were only 2 that were. Problem was, Naruto wasn't moving either. She moved to step forward when a lancing pain shot up her whole leg, a scream prying itself from her throat as she fell, blood gushing out the back of her knee. She turned, looking behind her and finding the damn Genin with the busted nose getting back to his feet even as he tried to cough air back down his abused throat. His friend had surrendered, he hadn't. She limped back, away from him towards her weapon even as she growled like a beast with the promise of retribution. Your boy there seems to have bitten off more than he could chew. Anoki pointed out. Unable to keep the glee from his tone. He chewed plenty. Was quick to point out. Helping his teammates and taking down 4 Genin isn't exactly something to scoff at. The girl was careless though and too impulsive. Not Chunin material as far as I'm concerned. Kid could take a punch last time I checked. Kisame was frowning. Was he hit by a mule or something? Kota sighed through his nostrils. The team had put up a good show. But their victory always had the odds stacked against them. He looked up to see if he could get a read on the Sannin, only to find the man as bored as when the fight started. He turned his eyes back towards the fights, watching as the 2 IWA Genin marched forward. One wobbling unsteadily on his feet, the other much easier stride. The probable culprit. He could only repeat the mental mantra of get up as he watched the blonde lump on the floor remain unmoving. To his surprise, however, before the Genin could finish crossing the distance, 5 shimmering mirrors of ice hovered between them and their target. The dome that had surrounded the careless Kumo team vanishing in wet cascades. Haku's image appeared in the mirrors as they surrounded the 2, glaring at them. The hell is this? One of them, the bigger one that didn't look nearly so exhausted, hissed out. Kiri's making nice with the leaf now? Haku brandished her Senbon, eyes cold as her mirrors. The panels angled themselves. You want to surrender now? The smaller Genin swallowed nervously, looking around at the 5 Hakus that glared down at him and daring a peek at the Kumo team that were struggling to walk in a straight line right now. He gasped. Gonna need a second. He said nervously to the bigger boy. The big one just glared at the ice mirrors. Nah, I don't think we'll be doing that. Way I see it, you're almost out of chakra, Kiri. This thing can't be cheap, and you were holding more of these things over the heads of the Kumo idiots over there, so you're almost out of juice. Haku frowned. Was her exhaustion that obvious? She gripped her Senbon. In that CA. The thin boy stood ramrod straight and let out a piercing shriek. She had to clutch at her ears even within the protection of the mirrors as her senses were assaulted, her concentration coming apart at the seams. The mirrors began to melt and the big Genin rushed straight towards one with a heaving hammer fist. The mirror cracked but held. But just the fact that it could crack under the weight of a bare fist showed just how weak she was right now. She looked up, ears and nose leaking blood as she forced herself to focus. A mirror shifted and she jumped. On the way, her foot smashed into the screeching Genin's face. She was sure that the burning pain she felt lancing up her ankle wasn't normal. The impact threw her off course, her mirror coming apart. She was forced to hit the ground. When she rolled to a stop, finding her limb twisted at the sheer speed she'd been flying at when it came in contact with the boy's face, and the searing pain that now made itself known, she came to the simple conclusion that it had been sprained, rather badly at that. What the hell was that? Zabuza growled, stalking forward to the edge of the platform. 1 second Haku had been preparing her attack, the next the whole thing had fallen to pieces with her flying out of one mirror to hit the ground. Don't get your titties in a bunch, Kisame drawled. She's fine. For the first time Orochimaru shifted his expression. Chuckling softly, he drew the eyes of Koto, A and Mei. Ah, the Otasori clan. And here I thought they were wiped out along with you would be Aburame no Ki-san. Keeping an ace in the hole? What the hell are they and what did the kid do? Zabuza hissed. They bend sound. Orochimaru answered simply. He'd encountered one member of this clan in the early days of the war. The ability had made him tinker with the idea of something that could do the same. A seal construct housed in a gauntlet perhaps. We heard nothing. Your girl, and more likely than not, Naruto, as well received a full, agonizing assault on their senses. The boy's use is, crude, from what I can tell, but effective in terms of raw power. Anoki sulked. After the death of virtually the entire clan in the series of battles known as the Bloody Marshes near Aim where they'd fought Hanzo the Salamander, the fact that they still had a handful of surviving members was a fairly decently kept secret. One that they'd been planning to keep from their greatest enemy as long as possible. Now that was out of the question with Orochimaru so easily identifying the bloodline. No doubt Hiruzen would file this information under the important to remember category rather than the oh that's nice file. Haku groaned, struggling to limp to her feet, favoring one leg heavily. She watched as the IWA Genin moved to check on his friend. A moment later, there was a hand on her arm, steadying her. She didn't turn her eyes away from the Genin. Thank you, Kimimaro-san. Not quite so pale. Kyofu muttered, startling her. Can you walk? Reserves? Not really, and low. It shamed her to admit it at the older girl. A second later she was admonishing herself for revealing her limits to the potential enemy. The girl nodded. Get behind me. I'm still okay. If that hit of yours managed to sprain your ankle that bad, you most likely gave the IWA Nin a concussion. She surmised. Haku nodded, grateful even as she limped back from the fight. The Genin saw them, growled, turning to look at the still prone Naruto before he rushed at the Genin. Kyofu cursed, and moved to give chase. The young man was barely 2 steps away from the blonde when she shouted. Touch him and your friend is dead. The boy froze, looking over his shoulder to see Kyofu glaring, holding a kunai over the throat of the Genin Haku had disabled. You ain't got the guts, Leaf. Kyofu's eyes narrowed, obsidian orbs glinting like flint knives. Try me. The Genin hesitated, conflicted for a moment before the decision was taken out of his hands. 2 bone spears sprouted out from the ground behind him, running him through at the hips with a gory spray of blood. He howled bloody murder, and would have fallen if not for the same instruments that were causing such agony to be the ones holding him aloft. Blood drenched the ground at his feet as he cried and whimpered tears of pure pain. You're done. Kimimaro said softly, marching up behind him, Ryoko's arm over his shoulder. The boy hissed, glaring over his shoulder. You cheated. The soft-spoken boy shrugged. You made your alliances. So did we. Don't feel bad because we're just better than you. Ryoko taunted. Oh my head. Naruto groaned, rubbing his skull as he sat himself straight up. Oh, Sakura-chan, you're losing your touch. Both of his teammates raised eyebrows. Sakura-chan? Ahem. They turned to look at the proctor of the exams. While choosing to ally yourself falls within the parameters of conduct and tactics that are allowed within the Chunin examinations, I'm afraid there can only be one winning team to this part of the exam. He reminded pointedly. Kimimaro disentangled himself from Ryoko, letting the girl fall back onto her rump before letting go of her hand and marching across the grounds towards the limping Haku, Kyofu marching past him to check on her own teammates. A huffed out a breath. An alliance. He turned his eyes towards Aro and Kisame. You two were the ones here. You orchestrate this? Partly. Kisame laughed as several Mednin used the lull in the fight to start collecting the injured. They're the ones that took to the idea so much though. Bitter that your teams didn't think the same? Perhaps if you or IWA had cooperated before the exam things could have been different. Seems to me that your team was the one that got the most out of it though. Anoki snarled. With the Yuki girl saving that Uzumaki and Kimimaro saving the girl. Kiri's two eliminated my Genin from the competition only to do nothing more than secure their own weakness and the strength of their adversaries. This is why no alliance is worth it. You sound bitter, Inoki. Orochi chuckled. Perhaps we'll ally with you and hand you your victory next time to make up for it. The Sandame's features darkened. They'd soon see how smug the serpent could be with this victory. How capable are you for battle? Kimimaro asked. Not very. Haku winced with guilt. My chakra is low. Another minute at best with my dome. And I can't walk or jump very well right now. My speed will be affected inside the mirrors as well. Kimimaro hummed in thought. He was running on nearly full reserves. His bone armor didn't require chakra once it settled, his bones only needed chakra to be moved and grown. Still with Haku like this it would be 1 against 3. 2 of those with a wind element. More than that, he hadn't seen Naruto's skills, which must have been considerable seeing how he managed to defeat 4 Genin. If he was still relatively unharmed, that was bad. Kyofu was also reserved in her fight, and was most likely in the best condition out of the 3. The only one of the 3 he would have been able to disable quickly was Ryoko, and even then, she still had a wind element. He'd never pitted his bones against the impossibly sharp blades, and 1 kunai from her might be enough to injure him. He took a breath, faced the proctor and bowed at the waist. We surrender. What? Naruto shot straight to his feet with that. Kimimaro-san. Haku protested. A ninja risks his life every day. He intoned, standing straight again. But that risk is a measured one, based on information, preparation, and planning. Not on blind luck and the hope that sheer force can overwhelm the position. He looked to Haku. Victory is too uncertain as such, the words of our Nidame must hold true. Pull back to push back. This feels, I kind of feel like crap. Ryoko muttered. You guys helped us, and lost because of it. Kimimaro nodded. If he regretted offering aid they couldn't really tell behind his placid face. Haku offered a sad little smile. It's okay. Doesn't feel okay. Naruto muttered looking over towards the proctor. Can we surrender instead? It was a Chunin that shunshined onto the platform informing them of the Kiri Genin's surrender. Before anyone could get another word in edgewise, Anoki stood up from his chair marching over towards the front of the platform with quick, determined strides that set off alarm bells in the Sanin's head. Ryotenbin cleared his throat. Congratulations to you 3 that have won this part of the examinations. Now we move towards the final part. The serpent's hackles rose. Do your scales tip too far, Ryotenbin? He wondered. Kuratsuchi blinked as her father started walking out onto the field. Dad? Don't worry, Kuro-chan. He smiled over his shoulder. I'll be back real soon. Aka, make sure she stays put. Yes, sir. Her big friend nodded. She felt a nervous sliver of unease settle in her stomach. In the battles of a shinobi, not all factors can be taken into account, not all threats can be known beforehand. You must adapt accordingly to surprises and unexpected conditions. These conditions will rarely be favorable, and rarely will your enemy fight you on even terms. Anoki continued, watching as his son, a man on the level of Konoha's White Wolf, Hatake Kakashi, made his way onto the field as the medics cleared it out and the proctors pulled back the Kiri Genin, leaving his 3 targets on the field. You will find enemies in this world that are stronger than you. And at these times retreat will not be an option. As such you must defeat him, or endure him for 3 minutes. These are the conditions you must adapt to dash. I object to this. Orochimaru stepped forward, a scowl on his features. Anoki turned to look at the snake coldly over his shoulder. This is a part of Iwagakure's Chunin selection exam Sannin. The serpent hissed, his tongue flicking out between his teeth. I can taste your lies, Ryotenbin. And your bloodlust. Bloodlust, snake? He drawled. Projecting, are we? My Jounin can control himself just fine. But accidents do happen, don't they? He snarled. That's true for anyone. It happened to your yandame after all. That was about as close to an open declaration as he would ever get, and everyone knew it. Anoki panned his eyes behind him. His fellow Kage were watching closely, neutral expressions on their features. Kuta sat in his chair, brow scrunched as though he had a headache, mouth set in a grim line with his eyes closed. He looked back to Orochimaru. A cruel smile threatening to pull the side of his lips up. He'd go through 1,000 accusations of breaching the treaty, take on every sanction and cursed word 10 times over before he let another Namikaze walk this world. The Sannin straightened. I propose a change to the terms. He said. This isn't a forum for yo dash. Should my team dash, he spoke over the shorter man. Be defeated or lose without suffering crippling, permanent injury or death against your Jounin. He paused, staring into Anoki's eyes, and the Sandaime Tsuchikage could see a glimmer of something behind that gaze. Then you may kill me. With a crowd of over 1,000 people below them, the hush that fell over the box was astounding. Anoki's face twisted into a baleful smile, the sheer glee at Orochimaru's folly shining through every pore of his features. And if they win? Orochimaru's eyes flashed. Ever the predator. Then I kill your son. The smile faltered, but reasserted itself after a moment. 3 Genin defeating or surviving for 3 whole minutes one of his most elite Jounin. It was a pipe dream. He could kill the Sannin now, and kill the Namikaze spawn before he could set one foot in Konoha's border ever again. Deal. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.